Last night when this young man spoke, when you spoke about the extreme sadness, the grief, at the recognition of knowing, having a moment of pure knowing of the truth of who one is, and then by some mechanism of mind seeking pleasure or avoiding pain, turning from that and telling the truth about turning from that and the grief and sadness that appears. Most people are primarily interested in getting rid of that grief, getting rid of that sadness, because it's painful, it's suffering. But if you will look in your lives, I believe you will see that most of the activity of mind has been to get rid of that grief. There is a grief of losing form, losing loved objects, the attachment to objects, and then the grief when those are lost. But this is a deeper grief. It's really the grief of recognizing the betrayal of self to itself, rather than actually experience that betrayal. We usually get busy in fabricating proof that we didn't betray, gathering powers or pleasures or knowledge that proves in fact we really didn't betray. We really are okay. But this grief, this divine sadness is very important. It is a great gift from the emotional body. And we usually have at least a couple of ways of approaching that. One way is to dramatize the grief, to make the grief into a dance, or a song, or a play, to glorify the grief and the sadness and the pain. And another common way is to deny it, to push it down out of sight, out of feeling, to numb oneself, to deaden oneself. It doesn't matter which is chosen, the suffering is still there. The grief is still there, sadness is still there. The loss of being true to oneself is still present. It's very important for everyone in this room to recognize the truth of that experience of loss, the suffering of that, the agony, the deep sadness of that, and how that sadness gets covered in activity of gain and fear of further loss, and the covering, the dancing, the acquiring of objects, both subtle and gross, to avoid the final loss, which is perceived as the loss of this body, the death, the end, forever separate from what one has glimpsed to be eternal. There's a lot of hokum in the spiritual world. Do you know what hokum is? Oh, it really dates me. Hokum is garbage. There's a lot of garbage, which is really just a covering of this cry of the heart this wail, this tearing of the heart in the pain of the recognition of turning from the truth of beingness, from the truth of God, truth of eternal truth. There's so much activity to avoid that. And in our country in particular, or in the Western world in particular, with the avenues of activity, there is such a scurrying, a frantic search for something to take away the echo of that loss. But nothing does. And then there is the promise of the spiritual path. And the perhaps second surprise, the recognition of the innocent heart, open and in alignment with the truth of one's being. And the desire that usually arises at that very moment to not lose it again, to not throw it away again. But this is a trick also. This is another bite out of the apple of gain and loss. And usually what follows this bite is a simulation of what has been gained, of a blissful attitude, of a happy face, which it is preferable to the others, but it's still a lie. It's still a betrayal. So I would like to invite you to recognize that everyone has taken a bite out of that fruit. Everyone has searched to gain and run from losing. And in that, everyone is lost.